Hello. Apologies for the wait. Slight technical issue. Thanks, Shardy, for your help over the last hour or so. Yeah, no reason whatsoever, but it's not happening on Facebook. So we're just here on Instagram for the next half hour. Thanks for waiting. Thanks for joining. I'm hoping that questions will pop up at some point here in a second, and I'll see them. But yeah, Andrew Davies here. I'm casting director, freelance. Been doing it for about 5 or so years. It all started when I went to Fabulous Party with the King's Head back in 2015. I thought it'd be nice to kind of just join up that journey, and it feels quite fortuitous that this is the week that I was paired with George from Papa Tango. Back in my stage management days, about 10 years ago, I worked on an early play of Papa Tango, so it's nice to see George here this week. So that was on Tuesday. You can go and watch that on Facebook and on Instagram. But yeah, My Balloon Beats Your Astronaut was the amazing title of the play that I stage managed for Papa Tango about 10 years or so ago. That led me to Edinburgh. I got slightly obsessed with Edinburgh, wrote a play, and cast it myself in 2014, and recently actually just discovered an old blog that I wrote that summer, and the cast joined in with as well. Slightly fascinating reading back on some of my comments about the casting process and how much I felt at home with it and how amazing it felt. So yeah, nevertheless, it took another year for Adam, when I was co-producing it for a second time with the King's Head. It took Adam to sit in on the recalls and spot the casting opportunity. So hugely grateful to Adam and the King's Head for everything that happened in 2015. I cast everything at the King's Head for a year, all of their own productions for about a year from the summer of 2015, which was a great induction into casting properly and kind of learning it as a professional and learning the freelance nature of it. And I noticed it's Geoffrey Hyland's birthday today, so it is 5 years ago. I think the first big play I did for the King's Head was with Jeff and Effing Men, the original kind of full 10-man version of that cast. I know I went on to have various different lives after that, but that was amazing. But today, if that's left enough time for a few people to join, today was mainly for me to the one thing I wanted to talk about is castability in inverted commas, which is a phrase that gets used a lot. I've certainly been using it a lot this year. During lockdown, I've met a lot of actors through one-to-ones, and I'm now doing lots of workshops. Castability and what that means, and a couple of things that have changed this year or started to change, which I think is very exciting. So I was just going to cover off on a few of those, and then hopefully there'll be some questions coming in later on. I've got a couple that have come in already, so I've got some question topics to arrive at. But castability, I think, is just a fascinating thing. Traditionally, it has been, age, race, gender. They're the things that have driven a castability. That's how casting breakdowns have worked. And I think what would be great looking forward is I think we're moving away from that, and we're moving more into an adjective-driven casting world, which I'm particularly excited about. I think any actor has two halves to their castability. Initially, it is the things that are natural, so it is the age, race, gender stuff, accents, height, funny teeth, or whatever it is. There's always something that there is something natural about you that I think you should be at the front of a queue for, and that's my ethos for actors. It's about how do you drive yourself to the front of as many casting queues, as I would call them, as possible. There are lots of roles, lots of castings. How can you be at the front of the queue for as many as possible? Some of those will be down to natural, but I think, as I say, I think we're heading to a world where now be more interestingly about adjective-driven casting. So being feisty or clumsy or naive, innocent, etc. And it'd be great to see casting breakdowns change as the future moves along, and we get into a huge ideal about just continuing to drive as much inclusivity and diversity as possible. I think casting directors have been very strong on this for a number of years, but it feels like this year's been a bit of an industry wake-up on that front. So how do we invite underrepresented groups into the industry? We have to go out and show an ambition and a want for underrepresented groups. So that's about putting those groups on stage and on film, and then hopefully that will kind of drive more joining the industry at the bottom of the chain into drama schools, etc. So I think that's a big place where we're at the moment. It feels like we haven't kind of necessarily cracked the story with the basics like gender and race, let alone trans, non-binary, and all the other kind of disability sectors that there are, that we need to kind of just get more in to the industry so that we can cast them in roles that don't say that that's kind of what we need them to be, so we can kind of get to a place of being truly blind casting. So I think that's a great place that we're in at the moment, and I'm working all the time with actors on kind of trying to find out what that is. Sometimes it does feel relatively straightforward, and sometimes it is not at all, and sometimes having a breadth and a versatility is important. But then how do you stand out for certain roles for certain casting directors when you're in a pile of 2,000 submissions on the back of a spotlight breakdown? Huge questions. But that's kind of where I think we're heading, which is very exciting. And I think the other kind of big change that's happened this year, again partly forced by circumstance, is whether the show reel is the only thing that an actor has to go to show what they can do. I think we're much more open to any kind of video material, so whether that is monologues and self-tapes, so I think there are different places for each of them that they could live. I'm personally very happy to see a perfect right casting, nicely recorded monologue in Spotlight as well as a show reel. I think within Spotlight you can put a link through to a YouTube or Vimeo channel, so within that you could have all sorts of monologues and self-tapes. And it comes down to the clever labelling of that material. So if I am casting for a feisty teen, then your monologue about a feisty teen is labelled as such, so I know that's what I'm watching, as opposed to sitting to 2 or 3 minutes of a show reel, which may be just a collection of the material you have got. I think we've all recognised that a show reel is very limited and restricted to the work that you have done and have got material from, but there is more to show than that for most actors, and you can decide, okay, no, I think I'm very good at being feisty, that's the cue, one of the cues I want to be at the front of, so kind of a feisty monologue or scene is there and easily labelled for me to watch, so that in the 5 or 10 seconds that I might have to kind of look at each individual profile in a breakdown response, I'm watching the right thing, and it's as easy as possible. In those 5-10 seconds, and I'll get in trouble for saying this, casting directors just don't have the time to be imaginative, so I think you have to kind of make it easy, and it is absolutely possible to tell a narrative from the top of Spotlight in the headshots all the way down through the credits and the skills and the training, so that again, at a quick glance, wherever I'm looking, I can kind of start getting excited that for the certain type of role that I'm casting, that actor is the right person. In terms of casting for the stage, one of the questions I had the other day is how different is casting for the stage versus anything else. I, as I said, kind of did a year with The King's Head. During that time, started doing a couple of short films. Since then, I've cast a few feature films. There's a music video out that's out next week that we filmed back in June, which is very exciting, kind of while lockdown was still kind of happening. But yeah, in terms of my approach to casting for anything is pretty identical, in the fact that it's the most interesting and exciting talent to match the script. But in a casting audition room, I think there's another layer that is kind of going on in the room. There's another layer of interest for everyone on the panel. The director kind of really wants to know that they're going to enjoy working with someone in a locked room for 4 weeks. So kind of that personality level, I think, becomes much more to the fore in a theatre casting. It's not absent in a film casting, obviously, because I think anyone wants to work with people who are nice to work with. But definitely, I've kind of noticed that in theatre castings, that there's just that personality is just another level. So I think for an actor coming into an audition room, my advice is always just to enjoy it, and the fact that you've kind of got to that point. If there are 2,000 submissions in a breakdown pile, and kind of I've only got room for 10 or so actors to come into the room, that 2,000 to 10 ratio is the real battle, which goes back to my previous point about making sure if you've got a type or a narrative to tell, make sure that you do, so you rise to the top. And then once you're in the audition room, as I say, it's just kind of enjoy it. It's kind of be yourself. What happens in the room is out of your control. It's out of my control. It's usually out of everyone in the room's control. The right choice will become apparent during the audition. And I have completely forgotten what that point was. In terms of, so casting is kind of, is exactly the same. And then obviously how I approach a casting, that varies massively from project to project, whether it even requires a breakdown and whether that breakdown is in Spotlight or in any of the other kind of casting platforms that are available. And kind of looking to the future, we're obviously in a continued weird spell. There's no other way of putting it for all sectors of the industry. It does feel occasionally that there's going to be a big rush and a glut of casting work being done, and I think there's a lot of casting has gone on, even for projects that don't have any dates attached as such. It's a good time to at least get options sorted and kind of have those meetings. So there's a lot of that being going on. But in terms of kind of when films can kind of schedule shoots and plan practically, it continues to be incredibly difficult with local lockdowns obviously appearing all the time. And then you will get into an awkward place when we do come back properly, where the sequencing of actors and crew and sets and everything else is going to all pile on top of each other, which I'm slightly fascinated to just kind of sit back and see what that looks like. But yeah, otherwise for the future, I think the more that we can do as an industry just to get out and do stuff, I think that's very exciting. And again, we see stuff all the time. So, Lamco, who the King's Head have worked with a few times, they've got a play on this month in London, kind of in a pub garden, which is very exciting. We've seen the Old Vic kind of do a live stream of a live performance, and that's the one thing I think I've just been hankering after through all of this, is a live theatre performance that I can sit and enjoy and watch when it's live. I've seen some great material produced through Zoom, where kind of a play or a script kind of lives within those Zoom windows, and I think that can be very clever for people to get on top of that. So that was kind of where I got to in that update. Obviously, because I'm only in Instagram, I'm trying to see if there are any questions popping up. So if you've got any kind of questions, then please pop them in the questions box at the bottom of the screen, and I will answer those. I think the next thing that might be quite useful just to talk about from kind of where casting's at in the world that we're in at the moment, and where actors kind of are best positioning themselves. It is about understanding kind of what's your castability by adjective or a few, or is it actually just on narrative, on something natural. The predominant supply of actors in the UK is white, well-spoken, and kind of in their 20s. Anything outside of that becomes more and more unusual and much more interesting, and actually much more likely to be what I'm looking to cast for stuff. It's very infrequent that that central nub of white, well-spoken 20-somethings is exactly what's required. But there are lots of resources, and that's kind of one of my top tips at the moment, is to get on top of self-taping. Another thing that kind of has massively moved and changed during the last few months. It was already kind of coming and it was already on the rise, but going forward, absolutely something that is very much part of what we do. I think for all first rounds, kind of it is a self-tape process. I've done recalls this year in more of a meeting style, but obviously still online and kind of through Zoom and similar tools. So lots more on self-tape and just kind of getting used to what your face as an actor can do that sometimes you might not even be aware of. I think that's a fascinating way of looking at self-tapes. And in workshops that I'm running at the moment, kind of what's nice to actually do is have a small group of actors kind of watching each other do self-tapes of the same material and just be reassured at how different and how legitimate every single version is, and therefore how impossible it is for you to kind of make a decision as to, a bold choice is the wrong question. You need to kind of do your take and kind of your truth to that character. So lots more on kind of self-taping. There are kind of courses and lots of different people providing options to kind of hone up on self-taping. So I would definitely kind of recommend that. Feels like it's the number one tip. Otherwise, the thing behind self-tapes as well as the audition room full stop is I would just urge anyone to be comfortable and confident. That's kind of a bit of a mantra that I use a lot. Be comfortable and confident of kind of what you bring as an actor and kind of what you've done, so you can walk away from an audition room and just be proud of what you've done. Whether you were the best in the room or not is not an indicator of whether you're right for that role in the grand scheme and bigger picture of it. So yeah, be comfortable, be confident, just get underneath that. Be brilliant, obviously, but yeah, just be confident and be comfortable. Lots of other kind of resources out there at the moment. That's definitely back at the beginning of lockdown. Lots of stuff kind of arrived, which was really nice just to see the industry adapting and being flexible and quick-footed. I think there was a lot of it, so I think it could have been slightly overwhelming for some, but kind of other people have got stuck in. Whatever was right for anyone during those mad few months was the right thing in terms of, for me it was all about routine and being busy, but it's different for everybody. Lots of other resources out there, kind of actor forums, I think are a great way of just keeping in touch with everybody else and kind of learning as you go. We Audition is great for kind of providing the reader service that it does. I've done a few things through there. actonthis.tv, which is a great kind of community, lots of support information run by Ross Grant, kind of webinars every week, private member chats. They do lots and lots and lots of stuff. If any actor needs a motivational speaker kind of sat underneath them, then I would definitely recommend Act on This. But there's tons more. Kind of Manchester Actors platform that I'm quite close to here in Manchester are great. Do lots of sessions, lots of kind of TV specific acting work. Mixing Networks kind of do a load of things. I'm also kind of working at the moment with a company called Just Add Milk, who kind of provide lots of webinars with casting directors, producers, and the like. So lots of resources also out there to check out. No questions coming in, but that's, I think, because everyone else is trying to find us in Facebook this afternoon. Shadi's asked a question. Great. What steps would I advise for venues to start moving towards blind casting? That is a great question. As I said, I think casting directors have had an eye on this and been trying to do this for several years, but it gets stuck in the chain somewhere for lots of kind of very valid reasons. As a casting director, I know I'm always caught between a director and a producer. Those two people will always have very different objectives from any casting process or any production. As I've said, a director just wants kind of the best for their vision. A producer has an eye on kind of budgets and money, so kind of names can quite often come into play from that perspective. But blind casting, I think it's for all of us, and I've been saying this to actors as well. I think it goes all the way down to actors and agents, and it goes all the way up to producers and financiers. It is about really understanding what is required of a character from a script. If a character has no generational relationships within the script, they can be any age. If they are just needing to be feisty, they can again be anything. And even this isn't limited, because I think you can be kind of brave and creative with kind of some generational choices. If you are casting a family, the chances are you'll want the parents to obviously look older than their offspring, and the grandparents kind of to be a generation above. So in terms of kind of age, that feels like that drives that most of the time. I'd be interested to kind of, and I know there are theatre companies that would throw that out immediately, but I think that's a very interesting way of approaching that. And then if a character is just feisty, then kind of surely that's just the casting breakdown, and you review based on the options that you get on that. One of the, and this feels like a terrible thing to put out into the internet forever, but kind of one of my go-to analogies is Jane Eyre's Friend. So, and I will admit I've not read it, so I couldn't tell you any more. But kind of there's an immediate kind of thought that I think most of us would have if we were casting for the role of Jane Eyre's friend, which kind of on the face of it, she's probably quite young, long blonde hair, quite pretty. Kind of that feels like a very easy go-to assumption for the role of Jane Eyre's friend. But why? It could be a Polish bloke, or they could be deaf or blind, or in a wheelchair, or any colour, any height. I think all of those things come in. I think we all have to be brave and kind of going back to the script and actually unearthing what a character really has to be, which I think will be a brave conversation to have with writers, again, because most writers will have a preconception of kind of what they've written. But even understanding as producers, directors, casting people, agents and actors, just rewinding that whole conversation. And I think that's the only point at which truly blind casting could happen. But yeah, great question. Thanks, Shardy, for saving the day on having a question. Come up with another one as soon as you like. What else was I going to talk about? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm still fairly fresh to it all as a casting director. Kind of, I am by no means, certainly not yet, any kind of big shot TV casting director. I have a lot of advice to actors about kind of pinning down and kind of doing the research and kind of making contact and doing the networking with the right set of casting directors. So again, if you're a Shakespearean focused actor, then there's a set of skills that I think you probably call out in your spotlight profile. There's a certain set of casting directors who kind of do a lot of that. Similarly, if you want to do, a lot of the fantasy / fighty TV drama that kind of there's definitely a prevalence of at the moment. That's a different set of skills to call out in spotlight. It's a different set of headshots, or different selection of headshots. It's a different set of casting directors. So kind of my go-to advice on that has always been, find half a dozen or so casting directors and teams. It's the associate and the assistant, not necessarily kind of the named casting director. They're the people to kind of be emailing. Lots of contact information available on the cdg.co.uk website. So you can go there, you can find out who's doing what, and kind of just watch a lot of TV and not just focus on the kind of the big name in the opening credits of dramas as to who the casting director was, but actually kind of look in the closing credits. It's the associate or the assistant that is the person to really try and get on the radar of for kind of similar work that they do. So there's lots of Game of Thrones type spin-offs, well, there's a prequel, but lots of kind of spin-offs like that. So I think that's a great place to be in. Again, going back to castability in terms of, yes, some of it is natural, and I think some of it is about kind of deciding which adjectives you work best delivering, or enjoy, or again just like doing. You can, again, kind of I would always keep an eye on kind of what are the genres of in vogue at any time. All of it is about kind of increasing the marketability of you as an actor. You are a business, you are a brand. What do you stand for? In the same way that Asda has capital green letters and Sainsbury's has lowercase orange letters. Those decisions are made for a reason. I think an actor needs to think along the same lines and be a brand and stand out. Especially if you're in that very oversaturated, 20-somethings, female, white, relatively well-spoken. That's a huge saturation of talent. So how do you stand out amongst everyone else? Because somewhere in there are points of difference that you do have. So bring them to the fore. So when we want that role specifically, it's obvious that you're the right person. But similarly, going back to kind of my main gist today, it's how do you stand out for something based like an adjective or a couple of adjectives? Pick those. I think that's much more interesting, and hopefully, because I think it's the right way to go. Hopefully, it's the way that the industry is moving. So I think that would be brilliant. Great. I've literally lost time. We've got about 5 more minutes, I think, because we started late. So anyone else got any questions? Otherwise, I might just kind of do a bit of a quick wrap up and, well, a slow wrap up even. And just to add to kind of obviously the list of resources, I say to a lot of actors, I mentor quite a few actors, and it's about doing something every single day, I think, even if it's only 5 minutes. And some of that might be looking into the resources that I've kind of already mentioned, and being a reader or joining some actor communities, but it might also be watching and just learning and, you know, enveloping yourself in the industry and the craft. Actors on Actors is a great series on YouTube from Variety. Watched a great couple of those recently. I do recommend the Nick Holt and Paul Mescal one. This week I've watched the Dan Levy and Kieran Culkin one. There's loads of things like that. And then obviously here, use this resource and kind of go back through the KHTOnline library, which is in both Facebook and Instagram. I've watched a few great ones. Peter Darney, who I worked with a few years ago, great one kind of directing. Ricky Beadle Blair, who was always kind of fascinating to see. George, obviously from Papa Tango, who did it on Tuesday. A great insight into the kind of the background of kind of producing new playwriting, which I thought was great. Another favourite of mine was Tom Wright, who wrote a play that was on at the King's Head a couple of years ago, on the back of which I actually just went out and bought that and read that script. So yeah, go back through the KHTOnline and don't be surprised, just pick some at random. There are some that will call themselves out to you, just in they are in an area that you're interested in, whether it's writing, directing, producing, etc. But kind of, yeah, even everyone I think would learn something and kind of just from kind of diving into any of them randomly. So kind of use that resource. Is it a good strategy to keep emailing a casting director about a particular role? Are you pissing them off? Good question. I think my slight caveat on kind of emailing about specific roles is that in most instances, by the time it's out in the public domain that someone is casting something, most of it's already been done. So I think for particular roles, for me it comes down more to returning series where, you know, recommissioned series are kind of announced quite quickly ahead of the casting process, but in most instances I think the casting process happens so early on that sometimes it's before you know, a production is even confirmed. So about a particular role I kind of slightly question how that works. In terms of keeping emailing different casting directors, I do think that's a great strategy, and I touched on that a little while ago. My hunch is that kind of you pick half a dozen or so casting directors / associate / assistant, and something like 2 or 3 times a year, just kind of have an excuse for getting in touch. I think it's a very short email. The speculative purpose of sending emails to casting teams is, am I of interest to you this week? I think that's kind of what you're doing with those, and you know, it's just a gamble every single time, and you're just hoping that your headshot arrives on the right day, on the right desk. Because if I'm casting for something and someone pops up, I will look at it, and if I file it, and then I will at least file it. I'm trying to get better personally at kind of responding. Again, talking of things to watch, there's a great BAFTA Guru chat from last week, I think, or a couple of weeks ago, with the 4 casting nominees for the brand new BAFTA Casting Award. So they have a great conversation and kind of they touch on kind of keeping in touch with casting directors. I think kind of, yeah, it's half a dozen or so, because I think you need to be super genuine. That's, for me, is the approach. You know, a short opening paragraph that is about something of theirs that you have watched and you have got an opinion on, and then a short second paragraph where you include your excuse for getting in touch. You know, here I've done some new headshots, or I've recorded this, or whatever it is. You don't expect a response from that. It's just an excuse for kind of landing that day. So when you get back in touch with them, I think probably 2 or 3 times a year. It's infrequently enough that it's not annoying, but frequently enough that your name kind of starts to build some kind of brand awareness. In an ideal world, first email lands perfectly, offer you a role, perfect. Slightly more likely realism possibly is that kind of you have got a few emails under your belt, and what you really want to happen is kind of they're just sat in an office as a casting team and kind of go, oh, who was that person who kept emailing us about such and such. You kind of want to get to that point. So be super genuine, half a dozen or so. You know exactly who you're emailing. It's not Nina Gold. It's the associate or the assistant in the team that you're emailing. and just nail that. Probably at least half the blind emails that I get as a casting director, and obviously I can't say I get tons, but probably at least half of them have either got my name wrong, or the piece of my work that they've quoted just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't feel right. So I think, yeah, the strategy is about kind of keeping in touch with the right set of casting directors. If you know you want to do that kind of fantasy fighty type stuff, then kind of the Game of Thrones team, the Witcher team, Vikings, there's a whole kind of set of casting directors you can do your research on, and yes, go to them, have the right headshot, and I'd make it a large headshot, 2 short paragraphs in the email and 2 whopping great headshots next to each other. That's what your email is there to do. So make sure that's kind of big and loud, and that's what you want them to look at. And then, yeah, kind of keep coming back to them and just reminding them that you exist and where you're at. Charlie, I hope that answers your question. And I think we now are just beyond my half hour. So I'll just give another minute or so just in case anyone else has got another question. I don't know if Charlie's still here. Oh, thanks, Charlie. Thank you. Yeah. Otherwise, kind of keep an eye on these. Obviously, there's 2 a week, so kind of keep in touch with those. Go out and kind of look at resources. If you are an actor, if you are working in relation to any kind of casting director, casting team at the moment, just bear in mind how bare bones can you go with characters. Can you put a breakdown out that does not require you to say gender, age, or race? Can you just put a breakdown out that is about kind of the adjectives, or more of the personality of the character? That is where we need to get to. I think I've generally, probably 6 actors I've kind of called in for an audition, I think I've tried for one of them to not necessarily be what was expected to come in the room. I think it's about all of us in the whole industry moving that forward. Until we put underrepresented groups onto screen and onto stage, we are not going to draw them into the industry, and we won't be able to get to the point of being able to do blind casting properly. And I think that's the right way for us all to be headed. So yeah, talked about castability, video material. I did talk about stage, future, and then Otherwise, I do a variety of things. Charlie, have a look, see if there's anything that would be of interest to you or anyone else who's here. AndrewDaviesCasting.co.uk is the website. I do workshops, one-to-ones, and then as I say, kind of keep an eye out on things like Just Add Milk, ActOnThis.tv, Mixing Networks, Manchester Actors Platform, We Audition, etc., etc. There are tons of things for anyone who ever wants one. And I'll say thank you very much. Apologies for the late start. I will now go and have a lie down in something cold after all the stress of the hour before this, trying to get Facebook working. But thank you all so much for coming in this afternoon. And as I say, keep enjoying and kind of be comfortable and be confident. Thanks.